Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the P.A.S. Report Podcast. I am your host, Nick Giordano, and I'm glad you could join me today. If you're not already a subscriber, consider subscribing and following the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website. There, you can sign up for the newsletter, and I never spam you. I send out about one email a month with some updates or to highlight an important issue or event, so make sure to sign up for the newsletter. Now, there are a lot of new listeners out there, and I believe it's because people are hungry. They're tired of the 3.5-minute media segments that don't really explain anything. They don't delve into the issues, right? I mean, how can you talk about the United States and America and the problems we face in 3.5 minutes, especially the critical issues that have a detrimental impact on our way of life? And that's what this podcast is about. See, a lot of the issues that the media talks about, they're nothing more than distractions. And while they may be important to a certain degree, they're not really consequential to the survival of the United States. Since I started the podcast, I have focused on core issues that profoundly impact us, that profoundly impact the country, and even the international community, because we have deviated so far from the original intent. For far too long, we have allowed a failed education system where most Americans have no idea who our founders are, why they created the United States, the proper role of government, the concept of federalism, and our obligation in keeping this country a constitutional republic. Remember what Benjamin Franklin was asked upon the conclusion of the Constitutional Convention of 1787. He was asked, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? And Franklin replied, a republic if you can keep it. And that was always the worry, if we can keep it. See, our founding fathers, they all came to the convention with different ideas, different governing philosophies. The Constitution was a result of compromise. However, while they did have differing ideas, the one thing that united them was skepticism and a deep distrust of an all-powerful government. Many of the founders understood that the Constitution wasn't perfect. They recognized that it had its flaws, but they didn't think another convention would produce anything better. And they believed that they had built in enough safeguards, and ultimately, it would be up to us, we the people, to ensure the Constitution and the country's survival. And again, let's look at what Franklin had to say. He said, quote, in these sentiments, sir, I agree to this Constitution with all its faults, if there are such, because I think a general government is necessary for us, and there is no form of government but what may be a blessing to the people if well administered, and believe further that this is likely to be well administered for the course of years, and can only end in despotism, as other forms have done before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need a despotic government. End quote. And that's what's going on here. That's what the focus of this episode is about. Are we now at the point where we have become so corrupted, where we have forgotten the importance of American principles and values, where we've turned our back on the American identity, where we've abandoned the concepts of limited government? Are we now on the path toward despotism? It's no secret that I contend that we've strayed far from the bedrock principles of limited government. In an era where the government's reach extends further into our lives than ever before, America's existence is being challenged as the very liberties that have defined and propelled us to become an exceptional nation are under threat. As we witness the ever-expanding power and authority of the federal government, I have a question for you. When it comes to the government, how big is too big? How much government is too much government? Like, at what point do you say enough's enough? As our government has significantly expanded, has your life gotten any easier? Or has it gotten more challenging? Have they solved any problems? Or have they exacerbated them? Or as this expansion of government continues, have they created a whole new set of problems? These are important questions, and it shouldn't matter what side of the political aisle you subscribe to. It doesn't matter whether you lean left, right, you're in the middle. The impact of government expansion touches us all. And to my friends on the left out there, again, how much government is too much government? What don't you want the government? What don't you believe the government should be involved in? We have to look at these questions because the urgency goes beyond your political preferences. It's about preserving the core values that have defined America for centuries, but they want to destroy that. They want to take that away from us. It's why you see this strong anti-Americanism push throughout our society. It's an attempt to redefine everything we stand for. But I want you to think to yourself, if America didn't exist, if America never existed, what would the world look like? Do you think the world would be better off? Do you think the world would be in a better position today without America? Or do you think that America changed the course of human history, changed the trajectory of humanity? For all our faults, for all our sins, the United States has been a net positive for humanity, not just here in America for us, but in humanity. Unfortunately, you have so many people that have had it so easy that they take it for granted. And that's part of the problem. They've been conditioned to think that the government is the be-all, end-all, that the government exists to serve their every need. And so whenever a problem or issue arises, they turn to government to empower it further. In a free society, there's risk. There's always going to be risk. And no government can eliminate risk. If you want to try and eliminate risk as best you can, well then, go to a country like North Korea. I prefer to remain free, and I'm going to unpack it all when we get back from this quick break. When things go sideways, you want to be prepared. Protect you and your family. And people are concerned. They might have to go for a long time without food, electricity. That's why I want to introduce you to 4patriots.com. Get preparedness products you could use now, and that could save your life later. My favorite is 4Patriots' new solar generator, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It uses the endless free power of the sun to power your lights, your TV, medical equipment, even run your fridge. Plus, it's expandable and comes with a free solar panel. Or you can pick up one of 4Patriots' best-selling survival food kits. Delicious tasting and designed to last for 25 years. They even have kits with real meat. And if the power's out, no worries. Just boil water over a fire, simmer, and serve. You're going to enjoy a hot meal and stay safe in a crisis. More smart people than ever are finding 4Patriots. Over 2 million customers trust them, and you might have even seen them on TV. I had the folks at 4Patriots set up a special page for you at 4patriots.com/PAS so that listeners of this podcast can see this week's discounts and deals before they go away. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS, but you gotta hurry because the deals don't last long. So save more money, get peace of mind, and protect you and your family. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS. Welcome back, everyone. So before I get to the main topic, I just want to spend a few minutes examining the implications of the expulsion of George Santos from Congress. Now, what a character that guy is. When it comes to Santos's expulsion, I do have mixed feelings. He is only the 6th member of Congress to be expelled. He is the first Republican to ever be expelled from Congress. And let's face it, the guy is a fraud. He defrauded his voters. He defrauded his donors. He lied about every aspect of his life. He is currently facing a 23-count federal indictment. When it comes to our public officials, I mean, we should have the highest standard possible, but we don't. We should, but we don't. Instead, we have the lowest standard possible. Just look at all the scumbags that exist. People like Santos, they tarnish the reputation of our institutions. And while the overwhelming majority of people have a negative perception of Congress, the Santoses of the world always make it worse. If there is strong evidence suggesting serious misconduct, you have people that argue that the integrity of the legislative body is at stake and expulsion is necessary to maintain public trust. But, I mean, do our institutions even have integrity anymore? See, I could care less that Santos has been expelled. I'm not here to defend Santos. But let's not pretend he was expelled to uphold the integrity of the institution and protect the House's reputation. Let's not pretend that. What exactly is he being expelled for, and what precedent does it set? That's what we have to ask. He hasn't been found guilty of anything. And in this country, we still have the presumption of innocence until we're proven guilty in a court of law by a jury of our peers. At least for now, it's supposed to be that way. And so if this is the new precedent that's going to be set, if we're going to expel George Santos because he's under a 23-count indictment, well then what about Senator Bob Menendez, who's being charged with acting as a foreign agent, bribery, corruption, and a whole slew of other allegations? I mean, isn't accepting gold bars and cash and a Mercedes by a foreign government far more dangerous than what Santos has been charged with? What about Mayor Adams and the allegations surrounding possible foreign campaign violations from Turkey? I want to know what these new standards are and whether these standards will be applied equally regardless of political affiliation. Now, I'm not going to hold my breath. Others will argue that his expulsion was necessary because he lied and defrauded his constituents. Really? That's what he's going to be expelled for? Because if that's the case, a lot of politicians lie. Sure, he lied on just about every aspect of his life. But if lying now rises to the level of expulsion, well, don't we have to expel about 80% of the members of Congress? I mean, we won't really have a Congress if that's the case. If lying is the standard, do we have any elected officials anymore? Because, I mean, let's be honest. How many of you trust that the politicians are being honest with you? How many of you trust that they're telling the truth? How many promises do they make, and then when they get in office, they do the exact opposite thing? How many of them are liars and frauds? Remember when Senator Blumenthal lied about his military service in Vietnam? So when is he going to be expelled? Again, I'm not going to hold my breath because we know that there's double standards. There's one set of standards for Republicans. There's another set of standards for Democrats. As scummy as Santos is, again, I'm not defending him, but as scummy as he is, it's not like his lies hurt anyone. He should never have been in Congress in the first place. And if Republicans, Democrats, and the media had done their due diligence, they could have exposed this fraud and he would never have even ran for office. But consider this. I want you to consider who has done more harm to the United States, Santos or Congressman Adam Schiff. Schiff lied to the American people for years. He pushed the Trump-Russia collusion narrative, even though there was no evidence of collusion, even though that he was getting testimony behind the scenes that were saying the exact opposite of what he was telling the American public. He even had the nerve to appear on all the news programs proclaiming that he had more than circumstantial evidence proving something that didn't even exist. And he did this intentionally. He tore the country apart. He inflicted enormous damage on this country, and he made our politics toxic. So if we are going to talk about the importance of accountability, integrity, the importance of the reputation of the House of Representatives, shouldn't Congressman Schiff be expelled immediately? My point is that while Santos is a scumbag, and he shouldn't have ever been able to serve in Congress in the first place, there are those in Congress who have done far worse and have inflicted far more damage to the institution itself, but not only to the institution, to the country and the people, and yet there's no consequence. So if we are going to set a new precedent, at least let's be consistent. But there is no consistency. Again, because we've been conditioned to react to the superficial BS as opposed to the very consequential things that matter. And I'm going to talk about those consequential things when we get back from this quick break. Welcome back, everyone. Now it's time to focus on the fundamental question that echoes throughout the United States. When it comes to the government, how big is too big? The whole premise of this episode. Think back to the founding of this country. Even though most people weren't educated on it, our government consisted of 3 cabinet-level departments. We had a State Department that dealt with foreign policy. We had a Treasury Department that dealt with monetary policy. We had the Department of War. Use your imagination for what that is. Now, fast forward to present day, and the landscape has drastically changed. The federal government has grown exponentially. We now have 15 cabinet-level departments. We have numerous agencies housed within those departments. We have independent agencies outside the cabinet, like the CIA, the NSA, the EPA. We have regulatory commissions like the FEC, the FCC, the FTC. We have government corporations like the United States Postal Service and Amtrak. The proliferation of federal entities is nonstop, and it's resulted in this bureaucratic behemoth that is a far cry from what the founders envisioned. And the problem lies not only in the sheer number of federal entities that exist today, but the lack of transparency, the abuse of power, the lack of accountability. And it's gotten so much worse as the expansion continues. Yet people still want to have their heads buried in the sand. A few years back, you had Congress, they were having a hearing, and they asked one of the agencies, well, how many federal entities exist? It was either the Government Accountability Office or the Congressional Budget Office, one of them. But amazingly, the official was unable to answer the question. Now, this should be a simple Google search. How many federal entities exist within the United States? And a number should be spit out at you. But we can't answer the question. So Congress commissioned several agencies to figure it out. And the amazing part is that they all came back with different numbers. One said there were 200-something federal entities. Another said it's over 400. If you go on OPM and look at USA Jobs, you see over 500 listed. The fact that not a single government agency can confidently say how many federal entities exist is symptomatic of the larger issue of how we've abandoned the three principles of old republicanism that this country was established on. That the government is inherently flawed because it's created by human beings. Human beings are flawed, and so we take those flaws and they're going to exist in anything we create. Now, the theory behind that first principle is you don't want to relinquish power to the government because there's only one direction. As the government expands, the power of the government increases. So it brings us to the second principle, that liberty is best protected in the small state. It's why we developed a system of federalism where we have two levels of government, neither of which are created by the other. Both are supposed to operate independently of each other. The smaller the government, the more protection for liberty. The larger the government, as government expands, you're losing liberty. Finally, the government that governs the best governs least. Our founders understood quite well that as government expands, liberty is going to contract. And yet today, there are so many people who are willing to surrender precious liberties for this illusion of security, for the illusion that their lives are going to improve. Have your lives improved as the expansion of government has happened? Reflect on that for a minute. As the reach of government extends further into our lives, have our lives improved? What issues have they solved? Is our immigration process better or worse today? Has our education system improved the further the federal government entrenched itself in the issue? Or has student performance declined significantly? What about healthcare? It's always a controversial topic, been a major issue, especially for the last 50 years. Has healthcare improved since the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare? How many doctors has given up their private practices and are now part of some hospital network or corporation? You know, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, 70% of doctors left private practice because of the crushing regulations. And as a result, our healthcare has suffered. It used to be that if you wanted to get a routine physical, you'd get an appointment in a matter of days, maybe a week tops. Now you have to wait a month or two before you could get a physical. Now a doctor comes in the office, spends about 45 seconds to 3 minutes with you, and they leave. Why? Because this is the rules of the hospitals and corporations. They allocate how many patients you have to see per day, how long it's going to take, blah, 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 blah. So is healthcare any better since the government became more entrenched in healthcare? Do you think it's a coincidence that when the Affordable Care Act passed several years later, we see all these private practices closing up? What about Homeland Security? Has the government become more intrusive in our lives or less? Should we just allow the government to freely collect all electronic data? Should we allow parents to be investigated as domestic terrorists all because they're upset at what their kids are learning in the schools? Is it okay for the government to target traditional Catholics all because they don't like the stance of Catholics when it comes to the abortion issue or gender issues? And what have they done? You know, they say, oh, we got to exist because we prevented attacks. Well, yeah, again, in a free society, there's always going to be risks. Prior to 9/11, was the United States attacked before that? Yes, they were. Were these attacks happening on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? And the answer is no. Every several years, we'd get attacked by an international terror organization. So we build out this enormous apparatus, this enormous Homeland Security apparatus that usurps our rights, costs trillions upon trillions of dollars. And what have they really done besides violate our Constitution? This massive expansion of government threatens the very liberties that we sit there and claim are important. We constantly preach about a free society. Do you really believe that you're living in a free society today? Do you really believe that we're free? Because you're fooling yourself. When a government controls what we can see and what we can't, when they control what we could hear, what we could say, when they control when we could leave our homes, what businesses are essential, which ones aren't, what we must wear, who could come into our homes, when we could practice our faith and how we could practice our faith. When the government is dictating all those things, can you really say that you live in a free society? Now, some people on the left that subscribe to the left may be ready to blow a gasket if they're listening to this, but understand, this massive bureaucracy will target you. They'll target you in an instant when you go against their narrative. It may be one-sided right now, but believe me, it's going to flip sooner or later. See, the concept of limited government was deeply woven into the fabric of our nation's founding, but it has been forgotten because of this failed education system and the rise of the self-righteous entitlement culture that now exists in the United States, where we turn to government for every little problem or issue. Like, God forbid, we feel the slightest bit uncomfortable. We got to look to government. And it's not a coincidence that as the government continues to expand, the American dream feels further and further out of reach. This is the greatest country in the world. There's no other country like it. And yet we're destroying the uniqueness of it. Our lives have grown more complex. Our freedoms have narrowed. The national debt has skyrocketed. Fraud and abuse are rampant throughout the system. Cities are unsafe. But the truth is that we got to this point because of the choices that we, the people, have made. We, the people, have allowed this to happen because we allowed government power to expand unchecked. Not only did we not ask questions and challenge the expansion, many people actively encouraged it. And those that raised questions, well, they were attacked and they were marginalized. Even many conservatives who preach about limited government are just as guilty, as they have consistently voted to spend more money and to expand government powers. The federal government, as it stands today, has grown well beyond its intended boundaries. And it is time that we begin to reevaluate and return power back to the states, but more importantly, back to the people. It's not that difficult to rein in the federal government. There are solutions on the table. The difficult part is whether or not there is the will to do it. Do we have elected officials who rise above being a politician serving a political party to become statesmen? See, Congress can do this through the legislative process and funding mechanisms. Do they have the will and the courage to actually do it? Or we can call an Article 5 convention of states to try and rein in this massive federal bureaucracy. So there are ways to restore the balance if we have the will to do it. Because vigilance against an all-powerful, overbearing government is as vital today as it was back in 1776 and 1787. Everyone, regardless of political affiliation, should be wary of any government that, in the pursuit of the common good, as they claim, in pursuit of power, that they look to extinguish the flames of individual freedoms. We should demand that our government protect, not stifle, our inherent rights. And we need to be willing to accept the risks that come with that. See, to me, our liberties are not negotiable. Remember the clip that I played last week of the legislator from Ireland where she says the quiet part out loud? Take a listen. I'll play it again.
When you think about it, all law, all legislation is about the restriction of freedom. That's exactly what we're doing here, is we are restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good. You will see throughout our Constitution, yes, you have rights, but they are restricted for the common good. Everything needs to be balanced. And if your views on other people's identities go to make their lives unsafe, insecure, and cause them such deep discomfort that they cannot live in peace, then I believe that it is our job as legislators to restrict those freedoms for the common good.
All law, all legislation is designed to restrict human freedom. She said the quiet part out loud, and while that may have been over in Ireland, that's how many in power within the United States feel. They continually pass laws, even though the laws aren't necessary. They expand government power through statutory authority, and we accept it because they say it's for the common good. Again, I'll take it to the whole terrorism argument. We're seeing legislation to empower the government further when it comes to domestic and international terrorism. We already have over 80 laws when it comes to domestic and international terrorism. So someone out there, please tell me, out of those 80 plus laws that already exist, where's the defect? Why do we need another law? What is this new law going to do that the previous 80-something don't do? And if we're going to pass a new law, why don't we repeal some of the 80 plus that have already been passed? Does that make sense to anyone out there? Because it should. The fact is that you don't need another law. And we need to emphatically state that out loud, because now is the time for courage. The courage to speak out against the abuses, to stop this dangerous trend toward tyranny, need to happen now. We cannot be passive observers with our heads buried in the sand as an out-of-control bureaucracy believes that they are the guardians of democracy. Okay, they claim they're the guardians of democracy, yet they're willing to violate every single democratic principle and norm as they destroy our constitutional republic, and that's the intent. We are losing sight of the very thing that makes America so unique, that makes us exceptional. That's why this podcast is so important. Knowledge and an informed citizenry are powerful forces against authoritarianism, but they don't mean anything if we don't have the courage to exercise our liberties. And we also have to have discipline. Not every solution requires the government's involvement. We have obligations to our families, our neighbors, and our communities. We have to stop looking at the government as if they're the only entity that could solve problems. Ask yourself, whenever you have to deal with any government entity, whether you're opening a business, you want to do work on your home, whether you have to go visit a DMV or you visited Social Security, have you ever walked away when you dealt with government saying to yourself, wow, that was such a pleasant experience. I wish I could do that more often. Or do you walk away muttering several F-bombs under your voice because you're so aggravated? And if that's the case, why do we constantly empower them to do more when they have difficulty delivering on the very basics of what government is supposed to be doing? Free speech, open exchange of ideas, these are the lifeblood of our republic. It is our duty to question authority, challenge any government that seeks to control the narrative in order to shape our thoughts and opinions. They want things to spiral out of control because they know when people are desperate enough, they're going to turn to government, they're going to give it more power. So let's wake up out there. Let's begin to dismantle this big government apparatus. It's about preserving the core values that have defined America for centuries. Whether you lean left, right, in the middle, it doesn't matter. It affects us all. Understanding the limits of government is not just a conservative principle. It's essential for every person who actually values the concepts of liberty and freedom. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, share it with your family and friends and on social media. Give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating and take 30 seconds to leave a good review on any podcast platform that allows it. And I want to thank you for joining me. I'll be back next week with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.